welcome to this episode of the Origin Law Immigration Podcast. So we're looking to share some practical insights on key issues in U.S. immigration. And before we begin, we need to point out that the contents of this podcast is not meant to be legal advice. This means that you should not rely on anything we say to determine what you should or should not do. If you want to seek legal advice on your immigration issues, please go to the link below and request a consultation with our firm. So with that out of the way, we will begin in today's topic, which is adjustment of status interviews, specifically adjustment of status based on marriage. Andrew is joining us. He's one of the most experienced immigration attorneys in the country. He's been practicing U.S. immigration law for over 3 decades at this point. And
close to the fourth.
Close to the fourth, okay. So we'll start off just by diving right into it. So what exactly is the adjustment of status?
Well, it refers to an application that you file with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to change or adjust your status to that of a lawful permanent resident. Mm-hmm. So it's a form that you fill out and file with the government to become a lawful permanent resident, or what's commonly called a green card holder.
Right. So it's one of the ways to get a green card.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So if someone's looking to submit a green card application, they just married somebody who's a U.S. citizen, for example, and they're looking to apply for a green card. What are some ways for them to do that?
Well, they can go to the uscis.gov site
Mm-hmm.
and follow the instructions on that site.
Right.
They can speak with an attorney and have a consultation for
Right.
to save some time and to get an expert opinion about whether they're eligible and what the steps are required.
Sure.
And what particular issues may be relevant to their particular case.
Right.
Because the website, of course, isn't as an individualized explanation of the process. It's a general description of the process.
Right.
But that is a site to go to, of course. That's the primary site.
And that's interesting because if this person, a lot of it depends on where this person is, right? So the adjustment of status, if this person is in the country, they just got married, they're looking to file for their green card, they would have to go through this adjustment of status process, right? So
That's right. There is an option of having your visa or green card interview abroad at your U.S. Embassy or consul.
Right.
And that's something that we explore with the client in advance.
Mm-hmm.
The adjustment of status was designed to make it convenient for people that are here to avoid that need to travel to their home country and have an interview at the U.S. Embassy or consulate.
Sure.
It's viewed as a kind of a convenience to an applicant who happens to be in the U.S. for some other purpose, as a visitor or a student or working on a temporary visa. So we can explore, though, the options of doing it abroad with the client, because it is an option.
And I just feel like, one of the questions we get a lot is there's that understanding that if you file for adjustment of status, you're not going to be able to leave the country. And right now, it could be a fairly long waiting time. And if you want to stay employed, how exactly are we going to do some of these people do that in that process?
Well, with respect to employment, at the time that you file for adjustment of status, you can file a request for an authorization to work. It's called an EAD card. You'll be issued employment authorization document card. But that can take up to 6 months to receive or longer, depending upon current processing times. But you can get that card, which is designed to keep you, to allow you to continue to work while you're waiting for your interview. There's also an advanced parole document that allows you to travel and be paroled back into U.S. It's called advanced because you're getting it before you travel.
Right.
And that allows you to travel. If you happen to have an H visa or an L visa, which are 2 particular working visas, you can travel on those visas without the advanced parole document. Those are the exceptions.
Sure. That's really interesting and helpful. So now with this adjustment of status interview, what exactly is it? At which stage does that occur?
Well, that's usually at the last stage of the filing of the application. you're called in for a personal, both you and the spouse are called in for a personal interview before an immigration examiner in the local area of where you're residing, New York City or Philadelphia, and the purpose of the interview is there's a number of purposes. The primary purpose is to determine if you have a real bona fide relationship, a marital relationship.
Right.
So the immigration examiner at the interview will question you about your marriage. How did you meet? Where was your first date? When did you decide to get married? How was the wedding planned? Who attended? Can we see some photographs? And do you have any documents that reflect that you're married, such as a joint, or living together, such as a joint lease, a joint tax return, health insurance, and other items. So that's what the interview is primarily for. It's also there to verify your identity, to make sure you are the person that you claim to be on the papers, especially the American citizen is the person that claims to be the American citizen.
Sure.
And to review your immigration history to see if you violated any immigration laws. And also, you do get a fingerprinting that's taken to check and see if you have any criminal record. So all of that is done prior to the interview, but at the interview, you know, you go through the this review of your case to make sure that you're eligible. If you entered the U.S., for example, without a visa, if you came across the border without a visa, entered, we call it EWI, entry without inspection, you cannot adjust your status here.
Right.
So you have to show that you entered the U.S. with a visa, and that's part of the interview eligibility process.
Right. So essentially, this is sort of the last step where
Yes,
they're sort of looking at
the
everything.
final step is the decision,
Right.
which usually comes at the present time within a week or a few weeks after the interview. If everything goes well, you'll get a decision in the mail. Congratulations, you've been granted U.S. permanent residence. And then I guess the final thing is getting that card in the mail that says you're a U.S. permanent resident with an authorization or validity date for 10 years. And with that card, you can travel abroad, work in the U.S., come back in the U.S. with your regular passport and that card.
Right.
And even in the future, consider sponsoring other relatives.
And that's an interesting area we're diving into now, which is that how long does it take to get an interview scheduled these days? In your
Okay,
experience?
well, if you go to the USCIS website, they break it down by city. So some cities are not too long. Some cities are longer than others. So that's one way to get an estimate. It is, though, an estimate, and it's not necessarily a certainty
Right.
when that estimate is given. And the estimates are given in ranges. So for
Very hard to
instance,
know.
for instance, in New York, I believe it's 18 to 40 months from filing. But I just had a case that was scheduled within 18 months at the short end. So these estimates are the government guesses based upon the cases that they have pending. But the government's policy is to try to interview everyone within 6 months of filing.
Right.
So there's always an effort underfoot when these dates become longer and longer for the government to make an attempt to reduce the waiting period. So that's what's going on right now with COVID, because interviews were not taking place for some time, so there's been a backlog, and therefore it's taking longer than normal. Pre-COVID, I would have told the client 9 months to a year.
Right.
Some cases in New York City were scheduled in 5 to 6 months.
Right.
Post-COVID, I tell clients about 1.5 years to 2 years. But again, those are just my estimates. They could be wrong. It could take less time if there's a reopening of business in New York completely, and if immigration has the resources, and if some changes take place where immigration may even, in certain cases, decide not to conduct interviews. That's been discussed.
Right.
All of these options, or possibilities can affect the time process.
Yeah, and I think this is a good segue into just what's been happening recently. One of the requirements under the Trump administration was that they had to, we had to submit what is called the I-944, which is the Declaration of Self-Sufficiency, meaning that you can take care of yourself after you become a permanent resident. Now, as I understand, a few days ago, they repealed this requirement, which sort of illustrates the whole trend of the Biden administration of trying to make things a little bit easier. But do you see that as the trend going forward? And how do you see that affecting something like consular processing overseas in terms of timeframes and versus the adjustment of status?
Yeah, well, I just see that as a direction of the current administration, not to have what some have called a wealth test.
Mm-hmm.
And the repeal or the termination of this requirement on the 944, and going back to pre-Trump administration public charge standards, will, I think, continue. It's happening with respect to refugee law and asylum law. Of course, the president can't enact new laws.
Sure.
So there are certain restrictions that have to remain if they're part of the law.
Right.
But the president has a wide power on how to enforce the law and how to prioritize what areas to enforce, mm-hmm. and how to interpret the law in a way that's more favorable to that administration's viewpoint on immigration.
Right.
So that's what we can expect with respect to, I think, immigration of families.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're married to an American citizen, that's always been treated with the most, I would say, deference, because you're married to an American citizen. An American citizen has a right to marry in the U.S., not necessarily a right to marry someone and get a green card for that person automatically, but we kind of treasure the marital relationship. There's
Right.
no quota involved if you marry an American citizen.
Mm.
There's no limit to how many times an American citizen can sponsor someone.
Sure.
If the first marriage doesn't work out. So we seek to prioritize those cases. There's even a fiancé visa category for an American citizen in order to bring a foreign national to the United States and for 90 days determine if you wish to marry, and then if you marry, that foreign resident can become a permanent
Sure.
resident. So.
But that's sort of the issue we're still facing. But in terms of consular processing as a choice of how to go about this, and I guess I'm just curious, what regards to timing do you see from that perspective versus the?
Well, this is before COVID and pre-COVID. Before COVID, again, you would look at each consul in each country and see what's their normal processing times. Certain consuls were very quick. Mm-hmm. To interview, and if it's convenient to have the interview abroad, getting back to our original discussion with the client,
yeah.
We may suggest that. After COVID, for a year, the spouses of American citizens were still being interviewed, but there were significant delays. Mm-hmm. But they were one of the few cases that were being interviewed and going through, but there was significant delays.
Right.
And in processing, because there was a preliminary step of getting a visa petition approved by the Immigration Service in the United States first before the case could be interviewed abroad. And that time period was expanding. The same thing for fiancé cases. Mm-hmm. Pre-COVID, I brought in a fiancé in 2 months' time.
Wow. From
filing to visa. Post-COVID, it's taking over a year, and some consuls cannot issue fiancé visas because of COVID restrictions. Mm-hmm. So I think going forward, there's still the after effects of COVID,
a backlog,
that may result in somewhat of a backlog, but keep in mind American citizen sponsorship cases get priority. Mm-hmm. So if, let's say an example, you have an individual you met abroad, and that person is working abroad, doesn't want to apply to adjust status in the U.S., even though they visit you and they have that option, maybe you can do the case abroad,
right,
and get that person an interview abroad, and then when they come in, with their green card from abroad, they can work on day one.
Right.
If they're here as a visitor or a student and they apply for a green card to adjust their status, they don't get that working permit day one.
Right, they gotta wait.
They have to wait, so maybe, you know, or if that person is frequently traveling and they can't get that travel permit, they can't wait 6 months for a travel permit, maybe that person should continue to travel and process that case abroad in their home country.
Sure, sure.
Again, you know, so that's, you know, specific somewhat to how the home country, an embassy or consulate, is handling these matters, but
Right.
it's definitely an option. Like I've done visa interviews in Tokyo quite often on marriage cases, in Europe, in Spain, France, Italy,
All
all over, for individuals that were were separated, and had time to wait for their process. They didn't have to be together in the U.S. initially.
Okay. No, that's really, I think, a helpful point there. And that leads us to our next question here, which is, going back to the adjustment of status, and you're a U.S. citizen, you just got married. This interview process, how hard is it?
Okay, well, my approach is to prepare you for the hardest interview that could happen within reason. But in practice, I tell my clients, I'm just preparing you for this. But in most cases, the interview is over in a number of minutes, 15, 20 minutes. The interviewers see a number of marriages. They have a sense as to what marriages are necessarily legitimate and what may not be. And of course, if you have a legitimate marriage, and those are the only cases that we take, I expect the interviewer to catch that during the interview and not to delve into great detail about the relationship. But sometimes the interviewers, for whatever reasons, are suspicious, and they can question in detail clients, and that does happen. And I prepare the clients for that, to tell their story about how they met and how they came together and how they married. And it all is very important. We highlight the most important parts of their story. So that is also key to me. So I prepare the clients in great detail, but I don't want to scare the client, so I tell them, I'm preparing you so that when we go to the interview, everything will go so smoothly, you're well prepared, that the interviewer will finish the interview very quickly.
Right.
And don't expect all of these questions that I'm bringing up to be asked of you, but I'm just giving you an idea, and so that you're prepared just in case an unusual question comes up.
Right, right. And that's and to that end, in terms of an attorney going with the client to the interview, what kind of value do you see in that?
Okay, well, there's a number of reasons to have an attorney present. Number one, the context is this is a very important right to become a permanent resident. It can affect the rest of your life.
Right.
So why not have someone who can represent you, who's an expert and knows the law, be present? So just in case something unusual happens, or you get a difficult examiner, that attorney can act as a check. That attorney's role is to observe. He's not there to present an argument in your favor, but to observe and to make comments during the course of the interview. But just the fact that the lawyer is present for the interview imposes on the setting a sense of seriousness, and the immigration examiner also realizes that the attorney is watching.
Sure.
and making sure that the immigration examiner complies with all the requirements and procedures and doesn't act in any way, shape, or fashion inappropriately.
Right.
And also the examiner knows the attorney can ask to speak to the examiner's supervisor if something like that happens.
Sure.
Now, over my years of experience on these cases, I've never had to speak to a supervisor. I got close a few times, and I kind of made a judgment call. Everything else seemed to be going well, but I didn't like these few questions that this examiner was asking.
Right.
But the client wasn't that upset and seemed to be handling the matter well. And then at the end of the interview, I even said, do you want me to complain right now before we leave?
Mhm.
Because immigration will tell you, don't wait until you've left the room and gone home to complain, because it's much harder
Right.
to resolve an issue. If you can complain at the time you're there, the supervisor can get involved and assist you.
Right.
So, but I've never, thankfully, have had to go to that step.
Mhm.
I have made some comments to examiners to let them know I don't think this or that may be an appropriate question.
Right, right. And that's sort of, you know, how we got the idea for at least doing this segment, is that, you know, I was listening to you talk about just how you prepare clients for the adjustment of status interview, and just the adjustment of status process altogether. And it's really in a stark contrast to some of these, the perception of how this is just paperwork, or there's some tech companies that just sort of file forms for you. And it's interesting to see that, you know, the length that you will go to prepare these clients for something.
My role, or my preparation is I have to know about my clients' lives. I get to know them over the course of the year that I'm representing them. I get to know their story, how they met.
Mhm.
I get to know their background, and I get to know them as people. And that, to me, is part of telling their story to the immigration examiner, which I help them to do by preparing them to, you know, and going over the visa history and other issues. So yeah, I mean, in a sense, I become a member of your family for that period of time, who's there to guide you and assist you in going through this and handling any concerns or issues that pop up and anything that worries you and make you feel at ease. So it's a kind of counseling and also a kind of preparation role that requires you to know the client's background and history, where they came from, why they're here, what are their future plans.
Sure.
So that's my approach. But so I get to meet very interesting people as a result of that, because
Right.
I get to know about their lives, their accomplishments, who they are, what type of people they are, and that's, in one respect, you could say the most enjoyable aspect is, you know, the people that I meet and going to this interview, because we're not fighting the government at this interview, we're not suing in court, we're not fighting another party. It's everybody wants everything to work out smoothly, including the government. They don't want to refuse you, they want to approve you.
Right.
But of course, they have to run their checks and make sure everything is legitimate.
Yeah.
So it's a very pleasant ending that we have on this process, when everyone is satisfied and life in America can begin for someone.
Right.
But it is stressful leading up to it because of the obvious uncertainty until you get a decision.
Yeah, no, I think that's, that really is a good point. And I'm just trying to, I think it's time for us to sort of wrap up this segment. We're trying to keep things a little bit shorter, and our goal here really is to make more videos, because Andrew and our firm, we really have a lot of experience in immigration. And Andrew here not only is experienced with family-based immigration, he has represented a lot of big corporations in the business setting, as well as investors. And myself, I've worked with a lot of different types of investors, as well as various types of business immigration cases. So, you know, we're hoping to just make more content that people can find helpful and easy to understand. And so if you like the video, please give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And if you wish to schedule a consultation with us, there's a link that's going to be posted below. And hopefully this has been helpful, and we look forward to making more videos.